The phenomenon of fear can be considered in three aspects. We shall analyze what we are afraid of, fearing, and that about which are afraid. These possible aspects of fear are not accidental, they belong together. With them, the structure of attunement in general comes to the fore. We shall complete our analysis by alluding to the possible modifications of fear, each of which concerns its various structural factors. That before which we are afraid, the fearsome, is always something encountered within the world, either with the kind of being of something at hand or something objectively present or Dasein. We do not intend to report ontically about beings which often and for the most part can be fearsome, but to determine phenomenally what is fearsome in its fearsome character. What is it that belongs to the fearsome, as such which is encountered in fearing? What is feared has the character of being threatened. Here several points must be considered. 1. What is encountered has the relevant nature of harmfulness. It shows itself in a context of relevance. 2. Thus harmfulness aims at a definite range of what can be affected by it. So determined, it comes from a definite region. 3. The region itself and what comes from it is known as something which is unnerving, jehur. 4. As something threatening, what is harmful is not yet near enough to be dealt with, but it is coming near. As it approaches, harmfulness radiates and thus has the character of threatening. 5. This approaching occurs within nearness. Something may be harmful in the highest degree and may even be constantly coming nearer, but if it is still far off, it remains veiled in its fearsome nature. As something approaches in nearness, however, what is harmful is threatening, it can get us, and yet perhaps not. In approaching this it can, and yet in the end it may not get worse. It is fearsome, we say. 6. This means that what is harmful, approaching near, bears the revealed possibility of not happening and passing us by. This does not lessen or extinguish fearing, but enhances it. Fearing itself frees what we have characterized as threatening in a way which lets us be concerned with it. It is not that we initially ascertain a future evil, an illusion future ruin, and then are afraid of it. But neither does fearing first confirm something approaching us, rather it discovers it beforehand in its fearsomeness. And then fear in being afraid can clarify what is fearsome by explicitly looking at it. Circumspection sees what is fearsome, because it is in the attunement of fear. As a dormant possibility of attuned being in the world, fearing, fearfulness, has already disclosed the world with regard to the fact that something like a fearful thing can draw near to us from this fearfulness. The ability to draw near is itself freed by the essential, existential spatiality of being in the world. The about which warm fear is afraid is the fearful being itself, Dasein. Only a being which is concerned, in its being about that being can be afraid. Fearing discloses this being in its jeopardization, in its being left to itself. Although it does so in varying degrees of explicitness, fear always reveals Dasein in the being of its there. When we are afraid for house and home, this is not a counterexample for the above determination of what it is we are fearful about. For as being in the world, Dasein is always a heedful being. Initially and for the most part, Dasein is in terms of what it takes care of. The jeopardization of that is a threat to being with. Fear predominantly discloses Dasein in a privative way. It bewilders us and makes us lose our head. At the same time that fear closes off our jeopardized being and lets us see it, so that when fear has subsided, Dasein has to first find its way about again. Fear about, as being afraid of, always equiprimordially discloses, whether privatively or positively interworldly beings in their possibility of being threatening and being in with regard to its being threatened. Fear is a mode of attunement. But fearing about can also involve others, and we then speak of fearing for them. This fear for does not take away the other's fear from him. That is out of the question, because the other for whom we are afraid does not even have to be afraid on his part. We are afraid for the other most of all precisely when he is not afraid, and blunders recklessly into what is threatened. Fearing for is a mode of co-attunement with others, but it is not necessarily being afraid with them or even being afraid together. One can be afraid for without being afraid oneself. But viewed precisely, fearing for is after all being afraid oneself. What is feared here is the being with the other who could be snatched away from us. What is fearsome is not aimed directly at the one who is fearing. Fearing for knows in a way that it is unaffected, and yet is affected in the involvement of dancing with for whom it is afraid. It is not a matter here of degrees of feeling tones, but of existential modes. Fearing for does not lose its specific genuineness when it is really not afraid. factors constitutive for the full phenomenon of fear can vary. Thus, various possibilities of fear result. Approaching nearby belongs to the structure of encountering what is threatened. When something threatening itself suddenly bursts into heedful being in the world in its character of not right now, but at any moment, fear becomes alarm. Accordingly, we must distinguish in what is threatening the nearest approach of what threatens and the way in which this approach itself is encountered, namely, its suddenness. What we are alarmed about is initially something known and familiar. But when what threatens has the character of something completely unfamiliar, fear becomes horror. And when something threatening is encountered in the aspect of the horrible, and at the same time is encountered as something alarming, suddenness, fear becomes terror. We are familiar with further variations of fear, such as timidity, shyness, nervousness, misgiving. All modifications of fear as possibilities of attunement point to the fact that Dasein as being in the world is fearful. This fearfulness must not be understood in the ontic sense of a factical, isolated tendency, but rather as the existential possibility of the essential attunement of Dasein in general, which is, of course, not the only one.